Yahweh, hey, hi, hi. Yo, hey, hey, hi, yo, hi. Way, hey, hey, Yahweh, hey, hi, ya, hi. Yahweh, hey, hi, ya, hi. Yo, hey, hey, hi, yo, hi. Way, hey, hey, Yahweh, hey, hi, ya, hi. Way, hey, Yahweh, hey, hi. Yahweh, hey, hi. Yahweh, hey, hi. Yahweh, hey, hi.
Oh, nothing like music to transport us into this time together. So welcome and good morning to the Unitarian Congregation of Guelph. My name is Aspen Heisey, and I will be your service leader this morning. These stay-at-home live Zoom services are put together by various teams of inspired people from our congregation. This morning's team is Lisa Clendenning as the greeter, and we have Bill Greenaway as the tech producer, AKA this week's Wizard of Oz. He's behind a screen, pulling all the right levers and pushing the right buttons at the right time. And I will also be staying on as this morning's Reflection Circle facilitator at 11:45. Other people that have contributed to this service certainly would be Martha Savage, who kind of had the idea for this service after reading an article that Paul Smith wrote in the Guelph paper back in September or the fall sometime about Indigenous history and John A. MacDonald. And so a service idea was born out of that. And Martha put a lot of groundwork into the formation of this. And then she's handed it over to me a few days ago and asked if I would bring it out this morning. So she's not necessarily here this morning, but she did a lot of work on it. And then, of course, there's Paul Smith and Bruce Weaver, who we'll get to in a minute. At this point, our hope and trajectory is to be a diverse community of mixed ages, genders, sexual orientation, and race. And at this point, we would typically say, we welcome all who come in search for truth and meaning. That's still true. And to elaborate a little bit on that, about 6 years ago, we revised our mission or values statement and got it down to 5 succinct phrases. I'd like to think that these 5 bullets say something about that search for truth and meaning. And if you can listen to them and say check after each one, then I think you're in the right place this morning. As a Unitarian community, we strive to question freely, serve, inspire, and challenge, seek and celebrate diversity, support each other open-heartedly, and honor the web of existence.
In this flame, we witness the power of transformation. Awed again by the wonder of life, we are grateful to be vital to this living universe and inspiring community.
Thank you, BJ. Our service this morning includes Paul Smith, who is one of our community and well known to us. He'll be sharing more in depth about his personal family history and how that ties into the broader Indigenous story. And then we have Bruce Weaver, who might need a bit more introduction, although some of you would have heard him speak along with Jan Sherman and attend a workshop he gave here a few years ago, the Kairos blanket exercise, for those who might have attended. Bruce is a retired elementary school teacher. He and his wife have been in Guelph since 1983. Bruce has been active in Indigenous circles since his discovery of his Native heritage about 10 years ago. He is a status Indian under the Indian Act and a member of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte at Tiananaga. He currently facilitates a men's sharing circle as a firekeeper for the community and is a member of the 7 Generations Forward. As well, he works with the Guelph Public Library to develop stronger relations with the local Indigenous community. For the last 4 years, Bruce has facilitated the Kairos blanket exercise with local school boards, faith groups, including here at the Unitarian Congregation of Guelph and the University of Guelph and Ryerson University. Recently, he was appointed as one of 2 community members to the President's Advisory Committee on Anti-Racism at the University of Guelph. And I invite Bruce to do the land acknowledgement this morning instead of our usual Indigenous, the words that we say. Bruce, I invite you to do it the way you do it.
Thank you. I'll begin with my acknowledgement of myself, and that is Deogena de Yangyats, Ganyanka Haga, Ni Iok Waganyatan. Today, as we gather on this land and these waters to both share in this service together and later to work and play, let us remember that we are living on lands and waters under the dish with one spoon. This was one of the earliest treaties and recognizes the importance of sharing the land and resources, leaving enough for future generations, and keeping the dish and the spoon clean, a job that we continue to need to work on. The spoon is symbolic of two things. It's very easy to see the connection that it is a rounded object and therefore not a weapon. But I invite you to think as well of the spoon as being a symbol or metaphor for not using sharp words in our discussions, our conversations, and time with one another. As we go into this land, let us remember as well that we are still here. There are many Indigenous people in Guelph, many different nations represented, and our ties to the land remain and remain strong. And we invite you to help us regain that strength, that connection, and share in a journey together. Taima.
And now we have The Story for All Ages by Rick.
All right, I will be unmuting myself first of all, and just going to share my screen. So, in point of fact, the story is not by Rick, although it is by Richard Van Camp. And the story today is "May We Have Enough to Share." And a little bit about Richard. He's a proud member of the Dogrib Chilcho Nation from Fort Smith in Northwest Territories, and he's a prolific author. I did a little kind of research when Paul passed us the book, and he's got 5 collections of short stories, 6 baby books, 3 children's books, 5 comic books, and much, much more. And I encourage you to check out his website and see more about him. The dedication for today for this story is, and actually you just have to give me a second here, which tends to happen in Zoom, all your wonderful faces are covering up my screen, so I can't actually read here. Okay, I'm just gonna actually read from the book while we're going through this. Dedication for the sacred dancing child in all of us, and with a huge Masi Cho to my wife Kiwi Martin, and to our son Edizy Van Camp, for all your sweet love. And now, with no further ado, may we have enough to share. May we have enough to share, to know the sweetness of every day. May we have enough to share our homes, our food, our stories, our laughter. May we have snuggles, cuddles, kid sniffs and kisses. May we have hugs to warm each other's hearts. May the success and joy we see inspire our own dreams and wishes. May we have enough to lighten each other's sorrows. May we have enough to help. May we have enough to explore life's sweet mystery around us every day. May we have room to grow and be ourselves. May we have enough to honor each other and pray for the healing of Mother Earth. May we know love. And that's the back cover. And I just, again, like to also acknowledge the little bit at the bottom where it says photographs provided by members of Tea and Bannock, a collective blog by Indigenous women photographers. And thank you very much.
Kayuani kayue, kayuani kayue, wehio, hawi hawi ne gai na we are here. Kayuani kayue, kayuani kayue, wehio, hawi hawi ne gai na we are here. Kayuani kayue, kayuani kayue, wehio, hawi hawi ne gai na we are here. Kayuani kayue, kayuani kayue, wehio, hawi hawi ne gai na we are here.
And now, at this point, I would like to invite Paul Smith to go ahead with the presentation he has put together, and take it away, Paul.
I think we're doing Kim's video first, right?
Do you want to just set that up for us a little bit, Paul? Bill is ready to play it. Just maybe just help us understand what we're going to see.
Yeah, so we're going to see a little video put together by Kim Anderson, who is a Cree Métis woman who's a professor at the University of Guelph, and she's a virtual neighbor here and probably a distant cousin of mine. And she used to be at Laurier, Wilfrid Laurier University, where they made their second attempt to install a John A. Macdonald statue, and she was instrumental in getting it removed for the second time before it went on to be removed a third time in Wilmot Township.
Get over it.
Quit talking about the past.
I'm not responsible for something my ancestors did.
This is what we're often told as Indigenous peoples living in Canada. Sometimes conversations happen without us knowing our part in them. As a kid growing up in that nation's capital, I was immersed, uneducated, not thinking about who gets the bridges and who's on the summit, who gets celebrated and who gets erased. But sometimes it catches you, deep. The first time I saw it, I wanted to stand on one of those chairs and hang a noose around my neck to give my truth about what he did. I was walking across my university campus, looking for coffee, not the haunting trouble of history or my Cree Métis family's place in it. They're telling stories now of truth and reconciliation, but there it was, that story that I learned of 2 founding nations, newly erected. Instead of hanging, it was time to take a seat. It was me and my colleague Leanne, 2 Native women with PhDs in Canadian history, not the kind of Indians Sir John A. had in mind when he hung our leaders and put our children in residential schools. Grandfathers, forgive our dark humor, for we are mindful of all the Indigenous men who fill the jails today. Nimishomas, Big Bear, and Poundmaker. Nimishomas, who protected the starving and impoverished people. Nimishomas, who suffered the cold seats of Stony Mountain Prison at the hand of Sir John A. Macdonald. Nimishomas, who were not part of that conversation. Macdonald was knighted by Queen Victoria for his primary role in crafting the British North America Act, which established the Canadian nation on July 1, 1867. He rallied support across the West and encouraged British Columbia into Confederation by promising a railway to the Pacific, completed in 1885. Macdonald established the Northwest Mounted Police, now the RCMP, to provide order and security for Western settlers. A much-loved leader? It's Halloween, so our friends and allies hand out treats and truths to passers-by. We bring Louis Riel into the conversation and follow his words because sometimes it catches through the generations. Leanne and I are joined by my son, who brings life to our truths. And we join many others who write letters and make presentations about racial wallpapering, great white man narratives, and the aesthetics of commemoration. Collectively, and eventually, we bring it down. The sirs of the world don't like us playing with the iron hand of history. But this is exploration, discovery, commemoration. And what else to do but dance on the graves of this kind of representation?
So I'm going to continue this conversation. I should say, Tashi Kiawau, Paul Smith Dish-Shinishikan, and I just said my few words in Michif, saying, hello everybody, my name is Paul Smith, and that's the language of some of my ancestors at least. It's a language that many spoke and very few speak now. So the theme we came up with, Martha and I, was revisiting Canada's creation myth, and you heard some from Kim there and her collaborators and her son, and I'm going to build a bit on that. And so most of us will have learned that creation myth represented by the photo there in the top left corner, a bunch of old white guys in a room in Charlottetown, cutting a deal to get together. And that is part of our history, right? I guess the other part that we're talking about today is represented by the painting in the lower right-hand corner, showing one aspect of the dispossession of Indigenous peoples of our country and our continent. So that is, we're trying to reconcile or bring these histories together. And that's kind of what I will delve into from a personal point of view as well, or my family's point of view. I'm sure if Bernie Saunders had been there, things would have been different. But that's another kind of myth. The other part of our history, and you've heard some from different nations. This map shows the distribution of nations in Turtle Island, Canada, and the rest of Turtle Island before Europeans. So the names in those languages. So you've heard from a Mohawk, you've heard from an Oneida, you've heard from a Cree Métis already today. And they all have their individual histories and cultures that we don't learn about in school, or at least we didn't when I was in school. I think that's changing now, which is a good thing. So why am I talking about this? Why me? So my father is a Red River Métis, as I am I now. And so that's my dad and I there a little while ago, maybe a couple days ago at least. And my grandfather and grandmother, Mushaman, Newcomb, and Michif. And our family, the reason I'm doing this is because our family's history kind of illustrates a lot of this colonial history, or at least that key period in the late 19th century when a lot of things were done to target Indigenous peoples.
Look at you.
And in Ontario, especially in Ontario, I have to explain who the heck the Métis are. You know, apologies to Manitobans. I know there are a few Manitobans in the audience. Is that the Métis Nation is not a First Nation, and if you're a mixed ancestry, that doesn't necessarily make you a Métis person. So the first Métis were born in the unions between Cree and Anishinaabe women and European fur traders. So we developed a separate new culture in Western Canada, separate from Europeans and First Nations, with our own unique language, food, music, and so on. So that's important to keep in mind, and still flourishing, as you can tell by the young people in the picture. So a lot of this, and this is the crucible of history of relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada, post, this is when Canada was Canada. We can't blame the British or the French for what happened after 1867. So this is my Musham and my Newcomb, Sam Smith, not the singer, and Marianne Desmarais, and they lived in the Red River settlement here in Manitoba, and this shows around 1870, which is kind of a key date, and their travails over half a century kind of illustrate what happened collectively for us as a nation. So that big red area on the map in the top left shows what the Hudson's Bay Company controlled at one time, and they were granted that by the British Crown because the prevailing approach was, well, if it's not European, nobody owns it. So it was a terra nullius, empty land idea. So if there were non-Christians there, they don't have any rights, so you can take it over. That's fine, and that was an explicit policy, and it's still cited in court documents in lots of Indigenous land court cases. So as Kim said in her little video, Canada wanted to get that railway out to BC and clear the plains of the pesky Indigenous people. And so this is what they did to make that happen. So Rupert's Land was the Hudson's Bay Company tried to sell that to Canada, and Canada tried to go in and just take it over right away. And they met with resistance. So the Métis and the Red River community resisted that, and Louis Riel led them in that resistance in 1870. And they cut a deal with John A. Macdonald. Manitoba Act embodied that, promised 1.4 million acres to the Métis as part of that, and lots of other guarantees. But that was just paper. So the implementation was a betrayal of the Métis and led to a lot of their migration away from Red River. They call it the Reign of Terror after 1870. And that began a whole range of things that happened. Those treaties that were on the last map started to be signed to get through to that railway through to the West Coast. And the dreaded Indian Act came in 1876. And with that, the rationing policy, starvation policy, we call it now, where First Nations were starved in order to get them onto the reserves so they could get some rations in theory on the reserves. So that was a tactic. employed, and thousands of people died as a result, of course. And residential schools began, which we know more about because that's been in the news. And there was one culmination of that, certainly, is the Northwest Resistance, again, led by Riel. Riel was brought back from the United States to lead another resistance against the loss of land by the Métis in particular, but others in the Northwest as well, and the eventual hanging of Riel. And then in 1885, they also brought in a pass system, so First Nations couldn't get off their reserves without a little piece of paper from the Indian agent. And they couldn't sell a cow if they wanted to. They'd have to have a written approval. And then there was a banning of all ceremonies as well. So that was a period when a lot happened in the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada, and it set the stage for all of our history since. So that had an impact on my own family. My Sam and Marianne shown there, they left in the Reign of Terror from Red River and went west, eventually settling in Prince Albert. They had 2 little kids when they left, and they had a lot of other kids. They had 11 kids, so my grandfather was born in Prince Albert area. So, but that was not to last for too long, 15 years, so they had a pretty good stretch there. But the Northwest Resistance occurred there, and their eldest son, my great uncle Jack, he took up the cause with Riel and Dumont and others at Batoche, and so he was part of that. I don't think his dad approved of that, of course, as intergenerational things go. He wanted to stay out of the fray. At any rate, the result of that, eventually they left to go to Turtle Mountain in North Dakota to escape the backlash that occurred after 1885 as well. So Uncle Jack never did come back from North Dakota, but my grandfather came back with his parents a number of years later in the early 20th century. So that's a little thumbnail sketch of how all of that history impacted Canada and also impacted my ancestors and me indirectly. Who knows what would have happened if the history had been different. But we're now in a different phase of history where these are the Truth and Reconciliation commissioners, Murray Sinclair in the middle there, delivering their report in 2015 on Truth and Reconciliation. And no one could say that we're not in a new era where we're trying to reconcile the different components of history and arrive at a more realistic creation myth for Canada. So I think that's the end of my talk. But of course, if Bernie Sanders were here with his mittens, he might be able to help us again.
Thank you, Paul. Strong words, good words. It's really good, I think, to have that personal connection and that personal story that to embed that bigger picture on. And now what I'd like to do is just expand a little bit on what you've talked about in the West and say Clearing the Plains by James Dashuk is a wonderful resource available from our public library. I just have a couple of quotes to expand on what you've said already. When the opposition in the Parliament complained about the budget, MacDonald promised that emergency rations would be refused until the Indians were on the verge of starvation to reduce the expense. And he did so with such great success that available food actually rotted in government storehouses, despite malnutrition, sickness, and death across the prairies. And Paul mentioned that there was a pass system. That pass system was also part of a bigger problem, not only were you not allowed to leave the reserve, but you had to get permission from the Indian agent to sell any goods. And so if you were out competing the local white farmers, the Indian agent would simply refuse you permission. So you couldn't get into the economy. A very big problem. And the third point I'd like to make is Paul has highlighted malnutrition, starvation as a policy. It was a direct government policy, but what it did do is this was misread or denied, and medical researchers confidently declared that Indigenous peoples were simply more susceptible to disease. This became a very convenient narrative, and it became orthodoxy in Canada. It made the incredible loss of life on the plains a question of biological predisposition rather than one of state policy. And if you think in the last few decades, we still have that feeling about diabetes, the high rates among Indigenous people. Oh, they're genetically disposed. AIDS, suicide, they all get lumped under that old canard of disposition, not policy. The second area I'd like to move to is Paul has highlighted government and MacDonald. I'd like to take it another and just a slightly different direction, and that's to talk about the Northwest Mounted Police. And I'd like to put it in the frame that you all have heard how there is distrust of the police. Well, it's well rooted. The police were formed to subjugate the Indian. In 1885, it was the Northwest Mounted Police who brought kids as young as 5 from the Battleford School to watch 8 of their Indigenous elders and chiefs hung for their part in the uprising. You don't build trust that way. In 1923, in Ganasatake, near Montreal, the Mohawks there had a hereditary chief system that had been working quite well, thank you very much, for over 300 years. The police, at that time they were called the Dominion Police in Quebec, they came in, removed the hereditary chiefs from the council hall, shot the Grand Chief who tried to intervene, found 5 slightly inebriated people on the street, brought them into the hall, and said, "You 5 will elect a chief and council amongst you." And so for the Mohawks, they still say, that was our introduction to Canadian democracy, and we don't like it very much. So when you hear about distrust of police, the worry about murdered and missing Indigenous women, those are the bases, those are the roots. I'm glad Paul mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because I think it is truth and education that are going to get us out of this. Somebody said, today's buffalo is education. It's what we're going to build on, grow on, learn from. And I think I'll stop there and say thank you for listening. Thank you for the time with you.
Thank you very much, Bruce and Paul. At this, we have a few things left in our service. One of them is a little segment from the CBC show, This Hour Has 22 Minutes. And then there's a great music video that we're going to see. But before we get to those, we just want to take a pause here and say that, you know, we've just heard a lot of information to process, and we're all taking it in, each in our own way. And we'd like to pause and go into breakout rooms just for 5 minutes. Bill, if you could organize us into maybe 5 people in a room. And I invite you all to stay for that. We're not quite done with the service, so we will be coming back together for the remaining pieces. And if you're new to us, I assure you, you feel welcomed in your breakout room. And it's just really a reflection time to say, you know, what has caught your attention this morning with what you've heard, and what are you wrapping your head around that is maybe new to you, new information, or, you know, something along that line, like how have you been impacted personally by what you've just heard? And we'll just have a time to hear each other's thoughts about that, and then we'll come back together. Thank you, everyone. We're just about to the end. Let's have the CBC. This hour has 22 minutes. That, Bill, and then we'll go right into the music video, but we'll just have that for a minute or so, okay? And then we'll have the extinguishing of the chalice.
I am ready for the party. Look, check it out, the tie, the hat.
So Canada, you're 150.
It's cute. And you think that's old?
In Manitoba, in 1871, they signed Treaty 3, which brought Manitoba into Confederation. That means it's possible that we're only 146 years old.
The name Canada is a perfect metaphor for how our histories are joined into one. A history of appropriation and misunderstanding.
As we mark a century and a half of, let's call it, cohabitation.
Indigenous people have been on this land for millennia, so when it comes to celebrating newcomers claiming it for their own, naturally we have reservations. Pun intended.
Canada is 10 million square kilometers. So you're celebrating 10 million square kilometers. My reserve, which is right here, is 5,000 hectares. So how come you get 10 million kilometers and I only get this little prick? Oh, never mind that.
So let's take a second to remember the role Indigenous people played in making Canada what it is today.
Lucky for you, my mother's people were here for millennia with a handy cure for scurvy. An all too generous soul.
We helped European settlers survive in a new land. Well, new to them.
Even showed them how to fight. Don't wear red. And never mind the straight line.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
But when the battle was won, treaties became appropriation rather than sharing.
If you're at home and you're watching, stand up. Right, we're gonna sing together, okay? Okay, ready? Okay. Oh, Canada, your home's on native land.
My hope is that the next 150 years will be better for all of us.
Now go enjoy the party.
Time to take a stand to protect the children, protect the land, protect those waters and everything in it. Because another government is changing minute by minute, passing bill by bill without consultation, affecting all Canadians and all First Nations. Now we must fight and let our voices unite until we're one nation, one tribe, one light.
Every mother, every father, every son and daughter. Loving hearts, join our hands and we will start. Harmonize our nation, future generation.
Rally after rally until the bill's finale. We're here to kill Bill on will mentality. We flashing that skill, getting hotter than Brazil. C45's real as a $3 bill. All my people, stand up now. Say it loud, we not backing down. Stay proud, bang that drum real loud. Stay proud, bang that drum real loud.
Every mother, every father, every son and daughter. Unite our voice with loving hearts. Join our hands and we will start. Harmonize our nation, future generation.
Yeah, close your eyes and listen to her heartbeat. It's Mother Earth and she's crying to us softly. She said, son, will you please fight for me and pray with the sweet grass burning slowly. I felt pride seeing an elder stand up. He said, I sing not for me but for my grandson. And as the man reached over for his hand drum, we sang the chorus to a united anthem.
We're going to have the extinguishing of the chalice from BJ. And then I invite you all to stay for the reflection circle that happens at 11:45. But here we go.
We gather to light this chalice. We part, the flame lit within us, an inspired community.
Thank you, BJ. And I want to just remind people to look at your chat box if you'd like to have a list of books that Bruce has put together. From all of these can be found at the Guelph Public Library. And when I asked Paul and Bruce, you know, people want to know, well, what can we do? What can we do about this? And their answers was really just be educated. And so do lots of reading. There's some good movies on the NFB site. And so just be educated, do lots of reading. And we'll put this list of books along with the link of this recorded service when it comes out, probably a week from now. You'll have this available. So you can look forward to that. So anyway, we are finished with our service, and we'll have a reflection circle, which I believe will be quite rich. But now's a good time to take a break if you need to get a bio break or lunch or a cup of tea or something, and we'll be back at 11:45, or just feel free to talk amongst yourselves right now until 11:45.